Thank you very much, Eamon, and it's a great honour to be here tonight. When Eamon was telling the story of the city cemetery, one of the graves there is a man called Rutledge Kane, and a very senior Orangeman in Belfast, led Lord Randolph Churchill onto the stage of the Ulster Hall in February 1886. But on his headstone, it describes him as a loyal Irish patriot. And in every sense, he introduced me to the complexity of our history and memory. And in the process of looking at the headstones of the city cemetery in Milltown and now at Balmoral Cemetery, I'm reminded again and again of the enormous complexity of our history. And one feels it's a difficult history. Sometimes it's hard to deal with, but always it's enhancing. It gives you a sense of the dynamic past that exists in this island, no matter where we come from. And I think that is why we remember. And of course, we might sometimes put our memory in boxes and remember in a particular way. But the one thing that I can't avoid is that history always forces itself out of the box. It's complex and layered and brings you in directions that you actually didn't see what's coming down the track at you. But tonight I want to give how a Republican looks at 1916 and the values, the political values that emerge. I want to look first at the proclamation and give you a very brief view of what it represents. Talk about the aftermath of the Rising of a few years. Put it into a deeper historical context. And then talk about how Republics in Belfast commemorated the events this year. The one big difference between this year and 1966 in Belfast, there was one big parade in 1966. There was something quite different this year, and I'll talk about that. Of course, there are a multitude of memories and layers of understanding in the nationalist community around the events around in 1916. So what I'm going to do is give you a sense of the impact of that memorable week in Dublin, which really did change the politics of this island. And of course, central to remembering that week is to talk about the proclamation. It begins by laying claim on the past. It reminds us that those who went before us constantly shaped the idea of nationhood through their actions and through their lives, and often through their struggle against English government in Ireland. It refutes the long occupation of Ireland by a foreign power. It does that by asserting the consistency of the rebellious history and opposition over many centuries to English rule in Ireland. The proclamation in particular recognises the enormous contribution of those millions who fled the famine and went to North America in the 1840s. And the famine Irish have a direct link to the Easter Rising through individuals like Tom Clark, who was in America, James Connolly went to America, and indeed the organisation of Clan na Gael. And when one studies the history of 1916, you cannot but accept that North America is a driving force in making the rising happen through individuals like Devoy, but also through resources. Really, I think one of the things that was explored, one of the themes that was explored this year was the power of North America in the narrative of the Easter Rising. The proclamation also is a call to action. When the Irish Republican Brotherhood, the Irish Volunteers, and the Irish Citizen Army marched into the GPO on Easter Monday 1916. They, in their language, were seizing the time. There was also a few Hibernian rifles and a few in the Fianna, and a few common man went in with them on that Easter Monday. The proclamation defines how the natural resources of Ireland are to be guaranteed in the pursuit of happiness and prosperity for all. This sentiment of all being treated in a fair and equal way sits at the very centre of this historic document. It asserts equality as a central tenet of Irish republicanism. It guarantees religious and civil liberty. In this assertion, its anti-sectarian sentiment denounces the imposition of a religious-based caste system by the British government, which created historic and deep divisions in the Irish body politic. The proclamation establishes the right of every citizen to have equal rights and opportunities. In its demand for equality, it refutes the undemocratic nature of English rule and establishes representative democracy as a means for the creation of a national government. Government for the people, by the people, and with the people. So this document is really the foundation document, of course, today of the modern Irish state. But it is something much more. I think the document resonates. It is not just a call to action, but it sets out the conditions that the Republicans of 1916 wished to see in the Ireland that they wished to create. And indeed, to this day, we discuss the merits of that document. And do we have a society that reflects what that document called for? And one of the debates this year was matching in a sense, what was in the document to the type of lives that we lead today. I want to now move to the aftermath of the rebellion, and following the rising and the executions, there was, in my view, a fundamental change in the political psychology of large numbers of Irish people. It's what I call a flip moment. In a very short period, the psychology changed. The ideal of an Irish Republic was establishment. If you think of Ireland before 1916 and the big debates around Home Rule from 1886 onwards, and suddenly people are talking about within a year an Irish Republic, and what does that mean? The alternative narrative of the Republic and independence very quickly move centre stage away from the concept of Home Rule into the public space. As a consequence, the British state is under tremendous pressure, and its political and psychological challenge to the British state, this debate and this call for a republic. Clearly, in the aftermath of Easter week, the political centre of gravity moved from London to Ireland, and you begin to see that in the events that follow the rising. On the 12th of May 1916, Asquith, the British Prime Minister, visited Dublin, and at the end of May, Lord George was in Ireland, talking to Carson and Redmond in an attempt to salvage his Home Rule Bill. If you look at 1917, there are a series of by-elections which tell you that something's happening in the politics of this island. Count Plunkett, Joseph McGuinness, a Republican prisoner, his was the famous statement, put him in to get him out. And Eamon de Valera, they won 3 by-elections. And of course, this is an early indication of the collapse of the Irish Parliamentary Party. Of course, in 1917, you have the Irish Convention, and also the first, you begin to see the first elements of a campaign, an anti-conscription campaign, which really emerges in 1918. In April 1918, the Irish Party voted against the conscription bill in Westminster. Surely an indication. This is the party that spoke for involvement in the First World War. And yet by 1918, they're arguing against conscription, and they're arguing against conscription along with Sinn Féin. At a meeting in Dublin in the same month, the Redmonites and Republicans pledged to resist conscription. At the end of that year, in the 1918 general election, Sinn Féin won 73 of the 105 Westminster parliamentary seats. A month later, in January 1919, they convened the first Dáil in Dublin, and through this exercise of self-determination, the politics of the Republican struggle intensified the challenge to British authority in Ireland. There is, of course, a deeper historical context in which to place the Rising. Over many centuries, there was political opposition to English government in Ireland. There were wars of conquest, confiscations, penal enactments, which, exacerbated by famine and plagues, reduced many Irish to the lowest level of economic life. Republicanism, as a form of liberation, arrived in Ireland with the founding of the Society of United Irishmen. But of course, one could argue that republicanism in Ireland arrived with Cromwell's New Model Army, because of course they were Republicans too. But that's for another discussion. Republicans of the United Irish brand brought a coherence to separatist politics in Ireland. The concept of an independent Ireland, and I think this is the bedrock psychology of many Irish separatists and Republicans, was and remains a political aspiration held by many Irish people and Irish exiles. The political core of this historical aspiration is sourced in a belief that national independence would deliver democracy, prosperity, equality, and freedom. These core beliefs were historically a very powerful engine for political change. They were underpinned by the idea of an Irish nation and a belief that in its achievement, independence represents political liberation. The demand for a united and independent Ireland, therefore, contains the hope of delivery from English government and the achievement of political, social, and economic liberation. And it's worth looking at some of the expressions of this, the historical expressions of this. So when we look at the United Irishmen, constituted for the purpose of forwarding a brotherhood of affection, a communion of rights, and a union of power among Irishmen of every religious persuasion, and thereby to obtain a complete reform founded on the principles of civil, political, and religious liberty. If we move forward to 1840s and the Young Ireland movement, a nationality which may embrace Protestant, Catholic, and Dissenter, Milesian and Cromwellian, the Irishman of 100 generations, and the stranger who is within our gates. If you look forward then to the Fenian movement of 1867, and they make a declaration which I, when I came across it first, found it extraordinary in terms of what it said. All men are born with equal rights and an association to protect one another and share public burdens. Justice demands that such associations should rest upon a basis which maintains equality instead of destroying it. We therefore declare that, unable longer to endure the curse of the monarchy, we aim at founding a republic based on universal suffrage. This is in 1867, which shall secure to all the intrinsic value of their labour. The soil of Ireland, at present in the possession of an oligarchy, belongs to us, the Irish people, and to us it must remain, must be restored. And I find the last sentence quite extraordinary. We declare also in favour of absolute liberty of conscience and a complete separation of church and state. The proclamation of 1916 doesn't go that far in relation to what was said by the Fenians. So then I want to come forward now to 2016, and how then did Republicans in Belfast start to commemorate? What was their approach to the events of this year? On the 8th of June, there was an article in Andersonstown News announcing the formation of the Belfast Committee to highlight the connection between Belfast and the Easter Rising. A further meeting took place on 28th of June in Conway Mill, and we decided then to establish local committees throughout Belfast to commemorate key events and the Belfast personalities associated with the Easter Rising. We launched our programme on the 26th of October 2015, and that took place in the Belfast City Hall. I want to read out the ethos of the committee, the Belfast Committee, that was established, because I think it really set the tone for what we had wanted to do throughout the year. And this is the ethos, and we put it in the front of our programme. The anniversary of Easter Rising offers the possibility of marking, commemorating events while providing the opportunity to engage with a broad spectrum of Belfast public opinion. We wanted to engage with all political perspectives in the complexity of the Republican history. We wanted to create a dialogue around the events of the Rising, which is an invitation to a broad and progressive discourse. We wanted to be dignified in our approach to others by creating a narrative of hospitality. We wanted to construct a process that invites its participants into an engagement that generates a deep curiosity and a willingness to look at the history of the Easter Rising through many prisms. And we wanted to have an appeal for diverse age, gender, political groupings in Belfast. And we wanted to locate the events of 1916 within their wider historical context. Our main focus in Belfast was to make the connection with the Rising through a number of key personalities associated with Belfast and the events of Easter week. These included James Connolly, Sean McDermott, Dennis McConnell, Winifred Carney. There were two brothers, the Monaghan brothers, the Corr sisters, Seamus Robinson, Sean McEntee, and Owen McNeil. In looking at their participation in the events of that week, we also engaged with a broad history of events in the Belfast nationalist community. And this included the creation of the Sean Van Vocht, the cultural magazine by Ethna Carberry and Alice Milligan in 1896, the formation of this scout movement, the Fianna Éireann, by Bulmer Hobson, who of course was educated in Lisburn at the Quaker School, Friends School here in Lisburn. The foundation of the Dungannon Clubs by Dennis McCulloch and Bulmer Hobson in 1905. Sean McDermott, one of the signatories of the proclamation and who was executed in 1916, was recruited into the IRB in Belfast, and we wanted to look at his life. The Dungannon Club paper, the Republic, we wanted to look at the role of particularly Hobson. Hobson is a key individual in the narrative of 1916. It was Hobson who in August 1914 suggested to the IRB that they form a volunteer movement similar to the UVF, an Irish volunteer movement similar to the UVF. We wanted to look at Winnie Carney and the role of the trade unions, of course, and the establishment of the Irish Volunteers and the Common Man in Belfast. But in looking in that period, we couldn't help but look at areas that we considered we needed to reflect on: the lack of democracy, the structure of British government in Ireland, the franchise, what was it like in 1916, the population of Ireland, because the population of Ireland is a story in itself. We wanted to look at the rise of the Ulster Unionist movement and the formation of the UVF. And of course, 1916, the narrative of 1916 is also a First World War narrative. And in a sense, it wasn't just to look at Dublin in that week, but in its broad historical context. So we started off on 31st of January by an event in Clonard Street to Sean McDermott. Then we looked at the Core sisters, two sisters from the Armour Road, who were out in 1916. But when you look at their family history, one of their brothers had joined the Australian Army and another had joined the Canadian Army. One died at the Somme. So in this one family, we looked not just at a Republican narrative, but the narrative of the First World War and indeed an imperialist narrative. And we found that very, very common in the history of the period. In South and East Belfast, we used outdoor theatre. So we had theatre in the street as a means of telling the story. So in East Belfast, for instance, one of the people that came up in the theatre was a man called Joseph Campbell, of course known for his lyrics of My Lagan Love. In Andersonstown, they organised an event around the exhibition of 1916 memorabilia, and of course the Belfast National Graves did the Easter Sunday March to Milltown Cemetery. But also, before that, there was an unveiling of a statue of James Connolly, who lived on the Falls Road at Glenalina Terrace. There was a statue raised to him. And throughout the city, there have been a number of plaques located in locations connected to these individuals. In March, Republican women organised lectures and events to highlight the role of women in the Rising. And in the week before Easter, Fila in Erie, which is a part of Fila and Fubble, organised perspectives on 1916, the Easter Rising. And this included Unionist perspectives of the Rising and how Unionists saw it. We had events to highlight the role of women in Carney were organised in North Belfast. And again in August, Fila and Fubble organised lectures around the execution of Roger Casement, but also a number of talks on the Battle of the Somme. So what we had wanted this year was to have a broad engagement around 1916, to include as many views that we were able to include, and to look at a year and really, in some senses, to use this year and as a way of creating a template that will allow us to engage with the history of the combustible years that are ahead of us now. And to leave us all with a sense that while our history is difficult, and often difficult to talk about, that it is a dynamic history, and that we are enhanced by its breadth, not lessened by it. Thank you very much.